All right, so like Brooke said, today I'm going to talk about heat pumps and especially, implications and questions as they're applied in low and moderate income households. I'll start some with the why heat pumps, why electrifying buildings, and then a little bit of basics about what the heat pump technology is. Mass CEC has done several different programs and pilots in this area, and I'll talk about some of the lessons we've learned. And then finally, just a few of my concluding thoughts about how and when they might apply or be good solutions for low and moderate income households. So first, why are we talking about heat pumps in the context of clean energy and just stepping back? Massachusetts, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is legally required to get to net zero emissions by 2050. I also argue morally required as our role as a developed and heavily emitting economy. Buildings are a big part of that. They're 27% of our state's emissions are just from on-site fuels. So not even the electricity our buildings use, but just the fossil fuels that we burn in our buildings emit 27% of the greenhouse gases in our state. So obviously, if we're getting to net zero, we've got to do something about buildings. At the same time, they're a huge cost. Average households spend $2,500 per year on energy spending. As we heard in the presentation last week, that burden isn't equitably distributed among, the low-income households bear sort of a disproportionate energy burden. And just the last fact and figure I have on the bottom is just to emphasize that this will be a tricky challenge that we're trying to reach over 2.5 million buildings, residential, commercial, lab, all kinds of buildings. So it's a lot of decision makers that need to act differently between now and 2050. But there is sort of an emerging strategy of how we're going to get there from the state, and sort of a four-pronged strategy. One is electrifying end uses such as buildings, and you can see the quote here from our state's most recent clean energy and climate plan. That's the quote at the bottom saying that we really are going to have to start both deploying a lot more building envelope retrofits and also heat pumps. And then we need the second prong is sort of that energy efficiency, and also make sure the loads can be a little bit more flexible. Like when you need electricity in your home, if it's possible to shift that and make it more flexible, then it will better integrate with renewable electric supply. And the fourth prong is probably figuring out some kind of carbon sequestration, even as we drastically cut emissions. So what are heat pumps? Sort of at the highest level explanation I would give, these are some pictures of different kinds of heat pumps, which I'll talk more about in a minute, but they use a refrigerant loop to move heat between spaces. They're systems that can heat and cool. I think probably the easiest way to think about it is like it's an air conditioner that can work in reverse. And there are different kinds of heat pumps. The one that's probably most like an air conditioner or a central air conditioner is a centrally ducted heat pump, where you have an outdoor unit that can look almost exactly like an air conditioner outdoor unit, or might be a little bit taller and narrower, but sort of same idea, connected to a central air handler that then distributes heated or cooled air through ductwork throughout the home. There's also ductless heat pumps, which instead of running ducts through the home, just run the refrigerant lines through the home, and then they connect to different units that have little kind of fans right there in a space that's being conditioned. So the most common one, I'll show you pictures later, is the wall-mounted unit that are shown in these icons up here. There's also floor-mounted units, and these ductless can have just one indoor unit to one outdoor unit, or they can have multiple indoor units connected to one outdoor unit. You can sort of mix and match between ducted and ductless. This diagram shows a ductless on the first floor and a ducted serving the rooms upstairs. And then there are other kinds of heat pumps, the kind I was talking about mostly, drew and dumped heat from outdoors in the air. There's something called the ground source heat pump that draws heat and dumps heat into the ground. and more expensive to do up front, but long term more efficient because it's, the ground is a more consistent temperature than the air. And there are some other, not so common in this country and region yet, but there are air to water heat pumps too, where you have an outdoor unit that then connects to some kind of hot water heating system. And why are heat pumps sort of the answer to this challenge of decarbonizing buildings, getting fossil fuels out of buildings? If you look even today, they have significantly less greenhouse gas emissions per unit of heat. But then as we kind of pursue that third prong of cleaning up our electricity supply with more solar, more wind, then, as we eventually reach 100% renewable grid, heat pumps will also have zero emissions. So now I want to talk a little bit about some lessons we've learned from our different efforts on this space. I think sort of the first big one is that they can be standalone solutions for homes in Massachusetts. They can heat throughout the winter and serve as a sole source of heat for a well-insulated home. I guess I'm mentioning this, there was older models I think were less well designed for this climate, and there was the perception, they don't work great below freezing, but there have been some design and engineering changes that mean that these units can serve as the sole source of heat. They are sort of deployed most effectively if the home has had some efficiency and weatherization, like insulation and air sealing. You want an installer that's taking a thoughtful approach to system sizing. If you really are switching your whole home over, it's almost like a new heating system, and so you want someone who's being thoughtful about that. And then the last thing is, just a sort of almost seems like a silly little thing, but making sure that if you're really going to use this for your source of heat, that it's above the snow line. So this unit at the top here is right on the ground, covered in snow, and it kind of maybe had some water dripping onto it too and got frosted up. So you want to mount it up, either attach it to a building and mount it up, or put it on a stand, mount it up to the snow. So we've had a number of programs that have, had heat pumps successfully doing this in Massachusetts. We had a whole home pilot that just finished. We had a sort of similar effort specifically focused on low-income households. That is probably started a little earlier and is still ongoing. But has successfully shown that can work through the low-income programs in our state. We also had a VRF incentive program. VRF is just sort of industry name for a more commercial form of this technology. So through that program, we saw heat pumps being deployed in multifamily, including affordable housing multifamily development. So there are solutions for larger scale buildings as well. And we are specifically doing a pilot in public housing that is sort of ongoing. So they can work. Customers are happy with them. We've done some follow-up surveys for our whole home pilot and found that basically everyone is at least somewhat satisfied with the level of comfort for heating, and everyone was fully satisfied, or somewhat or fully satisfied with the level of comfort for cooling. I mentioned this already, but just to emphasize again that if there are opportunities to weatherize, insulate, air seal your home, that's going to mean that you can put in a smaller heat pump system, save money on the heat pump system up front, and then also it will cost you less to run because your home will need less heating and cooling as it's better weatherized. And the picture on the top is just someone doing a test of like how leaky is a home, which is a good way to start to know how much of an issue you have. And then the picture on the bottom shows the indoor air handling unit for a heat pump in an attic that's had spray foam in it. And this customer participated in our whole home pilot, and they actually did the spray foaming after they put in the heat pump. So some of the like silver bunchy stuff is their ducts, and those are insulated ducts. So the ductwork was already somewhat insulated, but they found once they insulated the whole attic, they just noticed the whole house could like cool down a lot more quickly, and it was just more comfortable to live in. And this is just a note that I think we probably need better solutions to get customers to do weatherization first, or to do both weatherization and heat pumps at the same time. And I know that's something we're thinking about at the Clean Energy Center. Some of my peers who are going to speak later from our Mass Save utility efficiency programs are definitely thinking about this question too. So definitely something we're all focused on. I do want to acknowledge that upfront and operating costs are currently a barrier to heat pump adoption. In our whole home pilot, we had median installed costs of $20,000 for retrofit homes and $14,000 for new construction. New construction could be designed sort of with heat pumps in mind, and also tend to be tighter buildings. We found lower cost there, but especially on the retrofit side, pretty high cost if you're thinking like your gas heater just failed. Maybe it costs $6,000 to $9,000 to get a new sort of drop-in boiler or furnace. You know, if you're adding cooling to a home that never had cooling, this may be the cheapest way, but you know, it's a huge upfront cost, and not something that every household can take on. There are financing mechanisms available through Mass Save. Our state offers a 0% interest loan for 7 years, but again, financing is not necessarily accessible to everyone, and there are still then the monthly payments. I mentioned that we had run this program specifically with ABCD through the Mass Save, that is also the provider for the Mass Save low income program, and they had sort of similar average costs, although recently, some of the more recent projects, they've been figuring out ways to get those costs more like 15 to 18,000 for ductless and 12 to 15 for ducted. So I think, you know, with some comfort with the technology, the right equipment, you know, the right installers, there are ways to drive it down some, but they are still like, it's a barrier, and probably something that we will, as a society, need to subsidize if we're really going to make this transition quickly. An alternate approach to fully covering your whole home with heat pumps, we ran another pilot, or we supported another pilot where homes put in maybe 1 or 2 compressors to try and heat the bulk of their heat, but still keep a backup system for when it got, you know, too cold for the heat pumps. And so those costs were only $7,700, still not cheap, but a more manageable upfront cost. So that was upfront cost side. Then there's the operating cost side. This is our recent estimate showing that heat pumps are basically on par with oil. Sometimes, you know, recent years they've been a little bit more expensive. Oil has been a little bit more expensive than heat pumps to operate, but more expensive than natural gas. Certainly if you have electric resistance or propane heat pumps will be cheaper to operate. I have this caveat here that your mileage may vary. This is based on a lot of assumptions we made for sort of a typical 2,000 square foot home. But there are a lot of assumptions that went into that about how efficient your fossil fuel systems were, your heat pumps were. So, you know, and this number, how well insulated the home was. So these are, I'm not saying these are like the costs you're going to see. And, you know, for different homes, this breakdown may shift one direction or the other. But right now, this is a big barrier, something I think about a lot in terms of heat pump adoption for low and moderate income households. And then I think, you know, the real kicker or challenge that we're in is that these prices may flip in 5 to 10 years, or even this winter. I think, you know, there started to be thoughts that gas prices may really go up this winter. And I think to a certain extent, residential customers will be shielded from the full impact of that. But, you know, we could really start to see this flip sooner from some price shocks like that, or, you know, in 5 to 10 years, just as people start to leave the gas system, it will get more expensive for those that remain. If there's more carbon pricing, these are all things that could drive the cost of gas up. So we can't just say, oh, well, you know, well-to-do people can get heat pumps and be early adopters and drive the technology, and everyone else will just wait. Because it may be that then, you know, we're in a situation 10 years from now where low-income households are all still using fossil fuels, and that's becoming more and more expensive. So it's definitely a key question, not just on my mind, but a lot of policymakers. Our Attorney General has really been pushing this issue at the Department of Public Utilities. And, you know, it is on people's minds of sort of what how to balance the short-term reality of lower gas prices with sort of what we're expecting in the mid to long term. And then the last thing I want to highlight is just some workforce challenges and opportunities that have come up from working in this space. We've definitely found some companies that are on board with full electrification of homes, but a lot aren't quite comfortable with the best practices to fully electrify homes. So that's sort of like a education barrier for the existing workforce. At the same time, this is a HVAC workforce in general is aging. A lot of the workforce is reaching retirement age, and it's typically been a pretty white male-dominated field. So there is an opportunity to bring new, more diverse workers into the profession that is, a well-paying career track and also a possible pathway to owning your own business. So this is definitely an area that Mass CEC hopes to expand our efforts in, recruiting new and more diverse workforce in this area. So my last slide here, just some final thoughts about, at this point, what I'd say for heat pumps in low and moderate households. And, this will depend on exactly, what kind of community or portfolio you're working with, but in general, I would say definitely think of installing this technology for new construction, where you have upfront costs comparable or less than other options. You can save the cost of running gas to your home. There may still be cost disparities between gas and heat pumps, but they are mitigated by more efficient buildings. So overall, lower utility bills should be lower cost differences. I think they're a strong contender for oil and propane retrofits. After the end of as our pilot has kind of been wrapping up in this space, Mass Save has taken over and begun offering no cost heat pump conversions for households in Massachusetts that are on oil and propane and below 60% of state median income. So this is a pretty new offering in the last year or so, and a great opportunity for people to go to heat pumps where it does make sense on an operating cost basis. And then I think in the upcoming year, you can expect to see, I'm not with Mass Save, so I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I think they've sent some signals that there's going to be some more significant incentives in the 60 to 80% of state median income range. So should be great to see that. And then for households that have natural gas, you have talked about this price split. So I would say proceed with caution for now. If there's an opportunity to weatherize, reduce utility costs, pairing with solar PV may be a way to bring down a household's electricity costs and therefore sort of flip the point at which, just make it so that heat pumps may be a more cost-effective solution than natural gas to operate. You can consider partial or supplemental systems, like I mentioned in our one pilot. I would say, if possible, to think about, if you're going that route, to think about what's the pathway to full electrification in the home, just so that the investment now can build towards a later investment instead of having to sort of redo it all in 5 to 10 years. And then just finally, as you're weighing different factors, consider other equity benefits of heat pumps, like let's discuss in the last presentation, access to cooling and just more comfortable spaces, and sort of that long-term utility cost flipping that we expect to see.